This should be fine here. That's the link to where we're streaming if you want to share it with anybody. And I think we're good. So welcome everyone to Actionable Innovations Conversations. My name is Lucy Gray, and I'm the co-founder along with several other people of this professional learning community focused on global education innovation. What we do is we work to support education leaders in all levels. We host conversations and connect people. So this is a networking event, and we hope that you will connect with other people as well. We write about global educational innovations on Medium, and my head is in the way, but we advise, we advocate, and we also are starting to do some consulting work. So if you want to join our community, you can visit actionableinnovations.global and be part of our community and share your work there as well. This used to be known as the Global Education Conference Network, and we held an annual conference for several years. It's coming back this November, and it's going to be called the GLOW Conference. You heard it here first. And that announcement officially will be going out in the next couple of weeks, along with a call for proposals. So stay tuned for more exciting events where we can come together and learn from each other. We have a new mission statement from my partner in crime is Dr. William Rankin, and he was the primary author on this. But we are expanding kind of our vision to look at global education innovation, not just from a global competence perspective, but also in terms of experiential learning and other topics that we think are really important. We're really interested in inspiring education leaders to innovate and to find their way post-COVID. And so that's really kind of what we're about. If you want to get more involved with us and potentially speak at one of these events or just be part of our community, you can always email me at lucy@lucygrayconsulting. And again, join our community at actionableinnovations.global. We also are available on social media. We have a Twitter handle and a YouTube channel where this recording will be following tonight's discussion. And you can find everything at linktree/actionableinno, or you can scan with your phone the QR code that's up on the left. While I'm giving you a minute to do that, we also want we want this to be a networking event. So make sure that you share who you are, what you do, where you're located perhaps in the world, to kind of give everybody a geographic sense of our community. And if you'd like to share your LinkedIn profile URL or your Twitter handle or anything like that, you're more than welcome to as well. And that way we can get to know you and connect with you. I do have some links that I'm going to place in the chat. I have Rebecca's, who's going to be with us, who's been my main contact for this event. I have her LinkedIn profile. I have their website and their book, the author's book listed here. So if you need any information that's mentioned, it's here in the chat right now. I will also post this again because I think people will probably be drifting in over the course of the evening. So please feel free to put your Twitter handle and your LinkedIn contact information if you would like to connect with others, because we really want this to be a great networking event for you. So I'm going to ask Rebecca. Actually, maybe I will skip ahead. Rebecca, can you introduce your group and really briefly, and then we'll do the Proust questionnaire or the Proust questionnaire, and then I'll turn it over to you guys to talk about your new guide.
Sure. So what I just thought is all of us would just say our name and where we are, what we're doing currently, and then I'll pass the baton. So my name is Rebecca Smoller. I am the Associate Director of Education at the National Association of Consumer Advocates. And previously I worked at the State University of New York doing global education initiatives, which is where I got started on this project. So I'm going to pass it to Bidhan.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Bidhan Chandra. I'm professor of International Business and Management in Empire State College, State University of New York. In addition to teaching international management courses in the face-to-face, online, and hybrid modalities, both in the US and several international locations, I've also worked as a corporate consultant and trainer for dozens of global virtual team building programs, where the main focus was on building effective cross-cultural communication skills.
Rooney, can you go next?
You're muted, Rooney.
Sorry. My name is Runi Mukherjee. I'm professor of psychology at the State University of New York College at Old Westbury. And I'm also a faculty member in the Neuroscience Institute. And most of my research is working with immigrant populations in the area of health disparities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But it's a lot of it is involved in training healthcare professionals to work in communities very different than their own. And I also teach multiple courses in the area of cross-cultural and intercultural psychology.
Susan?
I'm Susan Jagendorf-Sobierajski, and I am Executive Director of International Education at State University of New York, Cobleskill. And with all things international education, there has been a tremendous evolution that changes are happening as we speak. And of course, some has been precipitated by COVID, but there's the realization that international education is no longer just study abroad, sending students out, or bringing international students in, that it is very much the concepts of cross-cultural education need to be very much incorporated into the curriculum and co-curricular activities and general education programs as well. And that's something that we are working on.
And last but not least, Patrice.
I think that leaves me. Hi, I'm Patrice Torsivia Presco. I'm currently Director of Learning, Design, Technology, and Media at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And my team supports all things online learning for the School of Education. And right now we're launching a new part-time online program, Masters in Education Leadership, and which is a great way to both increase access, but also the number of international students that can participate. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I also started my career at SUNY, the State University of New York, which is where I met all these wonderful people, and previously taught in their international programs.
Wonderful. Well, we're so excited to have you all here tonight and learn from you. So thank you for coming. I know it's going to be a great discussion. So if you have not attended one of these sessions that we've done in the past, we typically do my partner, Don Buckley, usually asks a few questions just to get people kind of warmed up and loosened up. And it's based on the Proust questionnaire that's in the back of Vanity Fair magazine, if you've ever seen it, where they have a celebrity answer some questions. And some of them are really kind of hard. And the person that was supposed to speak at Actionable Innovations Conversations at the end of June, Heather Singmaster, she was really nervous about these questions. And it's not meant to be what got you kinds of questions. But here, I'm going to give you the link, everybody in the audience. And if you want to play along at home and answer some of these questions too, you can. So I'm going to start with the first one. I'm going to ask Rebecca, and then she can pass it over to her colleagues, and they can answer as well. So what is your perfect idea of happiness, Rebecca? What makes you happy?
What makes me happy?
Yeah.
Boy, you said this is not going to be a hard question.
I know.
What makes me happy, honestly, being with friends and family. I know it's a cheesy answer, but you know, simple things like reading with my son at night before bedtime. I just love cuddling with him, and he's 8 years old, and it's just something that I very much enjoyed. That these years will go by very quickly. So.
They will, and then they'll be 19 like my son, who I just took out to a college program out east. And similar to you, learning about my son is always interesting to me. So we went to a Red Sox game last Friday, and seeing him being so invested in the game and passionate about it was really exciting to me. So I think watching our kids grow up at whatever stage is definitely really satisfying. Who's next? Anybody else want to tackle that one?
I can go next. Mine is simple, like Rebecca's. I love to cook, and I'm happiest when I've got bunches of people that I've cooked for, and I'm usually not there with them. I'm usually just bringing stuff out and serving them, but that is truly the joy of my life, and it makes me very happy.
Is there a particular kind of food that you like to cook? Is there a specialty that you have?
Really anything, honestly. One of the things I love doing the most is whenever we go to another country, I always try to find a situation where I can either cook with somebody or, you know, hang around in a restaurant kitchen and watch them do what they do. And I usually, my long-suffering friends will eat food from that country for the next few months, because I will try to learn that cuisine and make it my own. But it's wonderful. It's like really exploring a culture through food makes me very happy.
I was a huge fan of Anthony Bourdain and his shows, and I know it breaks my heart. And my new one is the actor that's going to Italy.
Yes, I know who you're talking about.
I love Stanley Tucci. I love that show now. That's my new addiction. Anybody else want to tackle the happiness question?
Yeah, I will answer this both at the practical level and also at the philosophical level. At the practical level, what makes me happy is good food, and then long naps, and being with friends and family.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I think
at the philosophical level, I'm influenced by Sufi saint from India, the country I'm originally from. And the two verses, there's just short verse in 2 sentences. The meaning is that you are very, very happy when you have no expectations from other people.
Wow. Wow, that's deep. I love that. Where are you from in India originally?
I'm originally from the eastern part of India, a state called Jharkhand. It's not far from Kolkata.
Okay. I was in, where are you, Rooney, are you from India too?
Well, I'm not far from his state, also from Eastern India, from West Bengal.
Okay. I was in Mumbai a few years ago and loved it, and I would love to go back there. And my husband works from home in the financial services industry, and every morning he's connecting with their engineering team in India. It's fascinating to me how that's worked, and to see it, up close and personal now that he's working in our home. So that's wonderful. Susan, do you want to take a stab at perfect happiness?
Sure. I would say what makes me so happy is experiencing new cultures, and particularly in the work that I do, I feel like I have the best job in the world, because I get a chance then to really connect with partners and spend time with, well, I haven't been able to travel recently since COVID, but spending time in the country of the partner, the friend, and of course experience. I love to try every kind of food that's imaginable too. So, and then of course, family. I mean,
it's perfect comfort, I think, and it's comfort and happiness, I think. All the things that we're talking about. Patrice, anything you want to add to your idea of perfect happiness?
Sure. When you asked that question, the first thing I thought of is some people may be familiar with the Book of Love Languages. And mine is definitely time. And so similar to what others have said, time with family and friends. And during the pandemic, because we couldn't see one another, we started a weekly Zoom call with some of my kids and friends, and we've continued to do that, which has been really great. And I feel like I saw someone a couple of weeks ago that I haven't seen in over 3 years, and just being in the same physical space has taken on a whole new meaning to perfect happiness.
I agree. I agree. I just went to my first major conference, and it was very exciting to see everybody, but I got COVID. So I don't know if it was worth it or not, but I survived. So thank you. I want to make sure that we have enough time to hear from you guys about your actual work. So I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, and we'll hear a little bit of like a 20-minute overview, and then we'll do some Q&A with me and the audience. So thanks for coming, everyone, and we're excited to hear your story.
So I'll just kick us off again by thanking everyone for joining us tonight. We're really excited to share a bit about the book that we wrote, give you a little overview of it, explain why we think that it'll be beneficial for you to purchase the book maybe, but also just to implement some of the ideas that we've written about in here. And just something special that I want to share, especially as we were talking about perfect happiness, is working with this team is a great example of perfect happiness. As we shared during the introduction, we all used to work, some still do, at SUNY State University of New York, and that is how we all connected. And this, we have been meeting almost every week nightly over the last 10 years, working on projects and grants and eventually this book. And we just are in a state of perfect happiness to have the opportunity to share it with you tonight.
So why did we write this book? Well, as shared, each of us came from a very different place. And for me, when I was working at SUNY, I was managing a project called the Global Workforce Project. And this was an initiative to internationalize the general education curriculum by bringing in both international subjects like the environment and human rights, trade, as well as global workforce skills, including cross-cultural skills. And the teachers took a module and implemented it in their classroom. At the end of the experience, we had a huge number of assessments that we asked of all the professors and the students participating. And we found that the cross-cultural assessment that we used yielded nothing. That showed they gained absolutely nothing. But we had a fail-safe in that we also asked, I personally interviewed one student in each class that participated, and many of the students were talking about, oh my goodness, I gained all these things I learned about another culture and I view them so differently. And I'm like, well, but why are they talking about it here? And this, and the tool that we used showed absolutely no cross-cultural skills being gained. And for me, there was a light bulb moment that we needed a new tool to be able to assess cross-cultural skills. And that's why I got started on this project, and eventually we wrote the book. And I'm going to pass it on to someone else.
I can jump in. So as I mentioned, I used to work at SUNY in international programs. And at that time, a colleague of mine and I talked quite a bit about the fact that we had these international students that were part of the SUNY system. And then we had a lot of adult learners in New York who weren't able to physically travel abroad. And we had this idea of what we call the virtual term abroad. And so we started creating these collaborative sessions where students from each of the classrooms would get together in synchronous sessions, as well as working on collaborative assignments. And similar to what Rebecca shared, we had a lot of stories of how meaningful it was, how much they learned, how they stayed in contact after, how it impacted their work experience after they graduated. But we didn't have anything we could show to leadership to really demonstrate the value of this, why they might want to consider funding it, or even to get buy-in from other faculty that we wanted to have participate in the program. And so the combination of that need for assessment and also to be able to discuss with the faculty member we were collaborating with about the importance of thinking about things like learning objectives and having alignment between those learning objectives, what you're doing in your sessions, the assignment, and how you're assessing. And so that was, one of the things that really got me interested in putting this book together and sharing what we've learned with others.
And I will jump in then next. As I mentioned before, international education is going through tremendous changes. And historically, people just considered it to be something that was peripheral to the fundamentals of curriculum development in higher education. And over the last several years, it's been recognized that really international education needs to have let's say, it's very narrow barriers have to be purged, and that there needs to be ways to deal with cross-cultural skill development very vigorously within the larger curriculum, that it's an integral part of the experience that students have in higher education, also for faculty professional development, staff as well, and that if there is going to be legitimacy to this particular field, then there have to be ways to assess, to measure, and of course assess intercultural skill development. And it's important to be able to actually spell out what some of those intercultural skills are, and then to be able to find activities that would speak to those skills directly. And again, then following up, not just with anecdotal information and comments from students if they participated in some kind of activity that was cross-cultural, but real honest to goodness assessment, and so an important tool needed to be developed.
I'll go next. So as I said before, I teach in the university, but also I'm a cross-cultural trainer and consultant. And over the last 20 years, I have taught students in many countries, but also worked with American corporations, mainly India, US communication issues, because most of the teams did have huge problems in communication, although everybody spoke English. So one of the major challenges I always faced was the lack of a proper methodology for assessing the effectiveness of the courses or of the training program. So we mainly relied on anecdotal evidence, as Susan said. And as far as the corporate training is concerned, they used a sort Likert style evaluation form, and not a lot of information was derived from there. So my question was, how could I design and utilize a rubric-based, more scientific assessment method that would also motivate me to design appropriate course modules to meet the learning goals and objectives? And as we said, in 2013, we got a generous grant from SUNY to help us collaborate with each other. And we have a toolkit, but also we decided to write this book.
I guess I'll be the last one. And since Bidhan mentioned the word methodology, I should say I'm actually a methodologist and statistician by training. But a lot of the research that I do, as I mentioned before, is with new immigrant communities in the area of health disparities, researching health disparities. And much of what I had to do at one point was to design training programs for these healthcare professionals, nurses, doctors, community health workers, to go out into the community in prevention programs, navigating people through the healthcare system, which isn't easy. And when I was trying to design those programs, I realized there was very few real resources out there. There was a plethora of wonderful activities, but it was unclear to me that any of those activities actually addressed the multicultural competency learning outcomes, which are very clearly specified that everybody has to meet. And more importantly, again, as a methodologist, it wasn't at all obvious how data could be collected from those kinds of activities that I found out there. And there were even fewer resources to use to be able to assess the outcomes from any of the data that was being collected. And so that was my biggest concern, was here I am designing programs with difficulty. How do I actually know that they work? You can find out that they don't work because people have a hard time doing the jobs that they're assigned to do. But I wanted to find a way that I could actually monitor people's skills, the skills that they were developing, and then be able to apply the interventions that I needed to. So that's really where I started with this. And the idea that we don't actually have to go abroad or to have a faculty-led trip or a semester abroad to have people acquire these kinds of skills. Simply being able to work with people in their environments, carrying out the professional activities that they do, requires actual training and actual competency development. So the book really is, you know, the necessity is the mother of invention. The book really is that outcome of needing to find ways to design the activities, implement them in ways that data can be collected, and be able to assess that and look at those outcomes in such a way that the program can be made more effective, that skill development can be done more effectively. So that's my story.
I'm muted here. So jumping on to what Rooney just said, we wrote a book and we really tried to keep it concise. And we had to give you both the theoretical underpinning of our ideas of having outcome-based learning, and as well as how to apply the outcome-based learning to the cross-cultural skill development. And the book is a step-by-step process for you to be able to do just that. Take the idea of outcome-based learning, and the outcomes that you are trying to achieve are the cross-cultural skills that we outlined in the book. And so we provided not only the theoretical, but also the practical. So there's activities, and there's questionnaires, and there's assignments, and there's tips along the way for you to be able to take these theoretical ideas and implement them in wherever setting you are. If it's in the classroom, or if it's in the corporate boardroom, and everywhere in between, community programs. I mean, everything could really, cross-cultural was really communicating across difference. It's any difference that might arise. And in the book, we also have provided a lot of resources. As you could see here, we have the rubric, which we developed, consent forms, the pre-post experience questionnaire, and we also provided a sample course design.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the rubric itself. We started, as Bidhan mentioned, with a pilot project where we were funded through the IITG, which stands for the Innovations in Instructional Technology Grant from SUNY. And we had 17 faculty from all over SUNY who were part of this project, and they all had some aspect of intercultural skills learning as learning outcomes in their courses, and they agreed to send us their activities and the data that they had collected based on their activities, the student artifacts, and they were either narratives, they were journals, some of them were photographic essays, some montages, etc. The rubric itself is based on the AACU, the American Association of Colleges and Universities, value rubrics. And the value, the acronym value, stands for Valid Assessment of Learning Outcomes in Education, in undergraduate education, VALEW. There are 16 actual rubrics in that group of value rubrics. We looked through them and ended up compiling these rubrics, these particular topics that you see on the screen right now, so that there are, in our rubric, we have the definitions for them, and for each of these definitions of these skills, openness, cross-cultural worldviews, general connection to experience to personal growth, connection of cultural experiences to academic context, cultural self-awareness, general transfer of knowledge and skills, understanding the global context, and effective communication. We provide not only definitions, but actual exemplars that come from student responses to activities that enable you to actually score the data that you, if you're using our plan, implementing a particular design, particular set of outcomes, those exemplars for each level of the rubric actually are evidence-based. And as I said, they came from actual student artifacts, and the rubric itself, the current rubric that you will find in the book, went through multiple iterations. This team that you see sitting in front of you spent, I don't even want to tell you how many hours going back and forth on the exact definition and whether this particular exemplar really identified this level of this particular element of the rubric. So it is evidence-based. It's gone through thorough revision and iteration and reiteration. And we've tried to design it and present it in a way that's actually very usable, so that you can design an activity, have any one of these, and even though Patrice was going to remind me to say this, typically you would not want to have more than maybe 2, maybe 3 of these particular outcomes in a given course. 1 is a good idea, but more than 1 can be used, but activities should be designed so that they actually can test whatever element, whatever particular outcome that you're looking for. And then the book provides ways of collecting the data from such an activity, and then how to score that data for the level of achievement, either beginning, post, and pre, or development over time, however you want to use that. So,
if I can just add something, a very practical use of this, we have used this particular rubric with faculty-led study abroad proposals, because we want to make sure that when faculty are preparing a course to teach abroad, and with a certain topic, and they want to make sure that there are certain intercultural skills that will not less necessarily be fully developed in one go, but at least start the process. We recommend that they choose one of these 8 skills and then develop the course activities to make sure that the skill is being targeted. And we had some success with that and have to keep working on it.
There's a question in the chat from Lucy, and if I can read the chat, it says, are these assessments used in the final grade for a student, or just used as a guidepost for the student to reflect on their growth? It depends, the answer, and others should jump in, but it depends on what your outcomes are for your course. In some of my courses, I use the self-reflection to sort of look at the ways in which these particular skills have developed for the student. I don't typically use them in a very big way for the final grades. And it, again, depends on what the course is. In my training courses, it's not a grade. It is simply a way for me to be able to figure out whether the training has worked, and if there are people who need further work with them, that's how I use it. So it really is up to you how you want to use the rubric and how you want to use the outcomes from the rubric in terms of grading or any other purpose that you want to use it.
I would just add also, we on our campus, we have just gone through Middle States, which does tremendous, evaluation, determining whether or not you're going to be reaccredited. And what they pointed out very, very much to us is that when you are looking at assessment, you can't use grades for assessment. And that's why, what we've tried to do here with the categories that we've developed and the activities, so that you are able to monitor growth in students, but or whoever, whether you're training people. But the idea is not to tie it directly to a grade.
And I'm actually going to jump in here and say that when I first started working on the Global Workforce Project, it's because I wrote a grant and received government funding over a number of years. And the program officer told me that unless we had a strong assessment component, we would not get funded. And so I think this tool could actually really be used to bolster grants that are dealing with international education. And we used it for another grant actually later on, which was we used to test some of our theories for internationalizing teacher education. And this rubric was probably the key component for the reason I received funds. So there's a lot of different ways it can be used.
And I will say that we did use this for an undergraduate study abroad grant, and we got funded.
One last piece, though, all assessment in a way is for improvement. So again, the way in which, the context in which you're using the tool is for improving what you're doing, whether it's student learning, competency development, or even the effectiveness of what you're doing, the course that you've designed. So it really is an assessment tool that you can use incrementally. You can use it in ways that give you information that you want from the activity or that particular program that you're using the tool for.
And there's another question in the chat from Lottie. What place does student self-assessment or peer assessment play in your model? And one example that I can share is in a lot of the courses, and there's in the book we talk about this as well, is student reflection on their learning. And so this can actually be used to assess the students' reflection of their learning in order to get a sense of, are they meeting the outcomes that you want them to meet? And one of the things I just want to add that is especially important is that we learned early on is a student doesn't always know what it means to reflect on their learning. And so one of the things that we've done is share how to scaffold that for learners so that they understand what it means to truly reflect on their learning and be thinking about the outcomes that you want them to achieve, and then using our process to assess whether or not they've reached those outcomes.
So you can use this book in a variety of ways, and they're all put on the slide here. I'll not read them, but you can use it for a lot of different activities in different modalities. And one of the most popular uses may be for COIL or for study abroad programs, even faculty-led programs. You can use the materials from the book to design, redesign, and assess cross-cultural curriculum. You can use it for developing high-impact practices. Also, you can train staff to communicate effectively. So there are a lot of uses, including DEI. And if you have any particular question about whether you can use this in a particular situation or not, you can write it in the chat or you can ask verbally.
And then thank you for all the great questions that you've had already. I'm just going to wrap us up and turn it over to Lucy to continue facilitating. And she's already put links in the chat of how you can contact us and access our book. One thing that I did want to share is we would love to hear a little bit more from you if you want. And so we did create a Google Doc if you want to share your contact information, challenges that you're having in this area, what you're already doing in this area, or questions that you might want us to follow up on. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Lucy. Thank you. And keep those questions coming.
Yeah, so we had a lot of good questions coming through. One was from Lottie, who asked if, and Lottie, do you want to grab the camera or would you like me to ask it?
No, that's fine. I just wondered what part your model played, whether it was a formal part or an informal part with student self and or peer assessment, or if this is purely designed for teacher assessment.
I will use a formal assessment in my course in the fall. So I'm teaching international cross-cultural management course, and there was a self-assessment piece. I'm modifying it to reflect all the skills that are in the rubric and ask students to reflect whether this skill was met or not in their own words, in their own opinion. And this will be worth 20% of the grade.
One thing I'd like to point out too with COIL as an example, which is Collaborative Online International Learning or Virtual Exchange. There have been, recently I was at a webinar where there was discussion of students trying to determine, to self-assess, even before they engaged in this virtual exchange experience. And what they found is then when they went back to assess themselves afterwards, they recognized that they knew a lot less than they thought they did. So if you're only leaving it up to the students to assess themselves, you may not get the outcomes that you're designing your activities for. So that could be one facet of what you do, but wouldn't recommend that that's the sole way for this to be used.
Greg, you had a question too?
Sure. Thank you so much for your presentation. I wanted to find out more about kind of your process of validating the tool. I'm sure I could find out more in the book, but I'm just wondering how you thought about that and how you checked, like, what were some strategies you used around that?
I'm going to jump into this one. I was so afraid somebody would actually ask this question because we have not started the process of formal statistical methodological validation. It's again anecdotal. We've been using it. We've gotten feedback about it, but no, we have not formally started doing that. I'm hoping that we will, in fact, be able to engage in that. But since you asked the question, you know how difficult these validation studies are. And I'm going to, at some point when I can find the time to do it, is seek a grant so that we can actually do the formal validation of the study, of the rubric itself. I wish you hadn't asked.
Sorry.
Truthfully, it's something that we must do. We think we've all used it. Many of us have colleagues who've used it and found it useful. But again, it's anecdotal, and no, we have not gone through the formal validation process.
I mean, I think it's tough. I think what often happens with tools like this is it's validated against the previous tool, but it sounds like that isn't necessarily available. So that's going to make the process harder.
And, yes. One of the things that led us to actually create this, the tool and write the book, is that there's been so much theoretically written about intercultural skill development. I mean, all over the place. And of course, Darla Deerdorf, who kicked a lot of this off and has written multiple books and articles. We shared our book with her. And, she said that she was really fascinated by this because there hasn't been much that's really practically useful out there. And so, yes, we have a lot more that we, really have to work on. But we feel that at least this gives us a chance to begin making inroads in that area.
it's a process, right? It's not,
Yeah.
it's especially, I would think. So anecdotally, what's some of the feedback that you've gotten on the anecdotal front? I'd be curious to know uh, what your peers have said about it.
Could I just respond one last piece to Greg's question, because I really appreciate that he asked it. And you've actually identified the exact problem. There's nothing out there to actually compare this to. So it will require us to find a large body of people who will use it, provide us with the activities, give us the feedback from that. And that's the process that we need to start. So any of you who are interested in doing that, please let me know, and I'd be happy to work with you.
So anecdotally, how have people responded to this in general? You know, at SUNY, any of the SUNYs or elsewhere?
I would just say that at one point early on, and actually we've included one of our examples in the book from this, we've had a series of faculty-led study abroad programs in a program in South Africa. And we had a faculty member who actually used this rubric and created activities for students that were targeted. It was actually, it has to do with being in the wild, and it was connected with a fisheries and wildlife program. And what he found was that using this and expecting that there would be student personal reflections, as well as a series journals that had to be kept, and a series of questions that, as Patrice mentioned, sort of scaffolding that over time should get more and more complex. He was able to see where some students really seemed to make progress and you know, reach or at least get close to the goals that he was expecting and the student learning outcomes. And in other cases where some students did not really, let's say, gain as much intercultural knowledge as he would have hoped.
So this is really geared towards undergraduate and graduate students, I would assume. Is there, has anybody, do you know of anybody who's adopted this for possibly high school students or younger students in general? Or are there other tools that are similar out there that you know of that might be more developmentally appropriate for that population?
If you're just talking about, you know, intercultural skills, we mentioned before COIL, this collaborative online international learning, which is actually was initiated in the SUNY system and then has branched out all around the world. And in some areas of the world, they're way ahead of us these days. But anyway, it seems that with collaborative online international learning, that really can be used at almost any level. And also, if you're trying to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there was a case that was mentioned recently in SUNY that an alum who had been involved in a COIL project is now doing some teacher training to use COIL in K through 12. And so simply exposing, it's not just an exposure, but having students being put in a situation where in order to negotiate meaning and just being able to interact in a way that there will be, you know, communication that is valid, that this can happen at any level.
I think teacher prep programs would really benefit from incorporating this for sure. And I'm working on a project involved with that. So I'm definitely going to pass it on. The other question I have for you all is, I like this because it's a very clear-cut tool that is devoid of politicization, I guess. It's just about how people should be. And I'm wondering if I'm lacking the right language for this, but I'm wondering if you've gotten any pushback about in this crazy climate that we're living right now in the United States, if you've gotten pushback from people about teaching these skills, which I think are, let me make sure I'm clear on this, I think are really core to us as humans. How do we negotiate? How do we promote this kind of intercultural awareness in a climate that is really kind of hostile in some parts of the country? How do we elevate the importance of this, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I'd be really curious if you've experienced pushback and how you position this so that people are receptive to it.
I did not face any pushback from anyone about anything that I do about cross-cultural communication courses or training programs. The only thing is that for some training programs which were supported by the university and the union, and it was a free program for anybody, any faculty member within the SUNY system, there was some lack of interest among some faculty members. But there was no pushback. Nobody said anything adverse about my efforts.
If I could jump in, Lucy, and address this from a slightly different, your question, but from a slightly different place. I've actually used the rubric in a pre-post fashion. We sort of don't often realize that we live in a multicultural environment, and I teach in an institution which is an MSI. It is a minority serving institution, and in my classrooms I have students literally from all over the world, from the Caribbean, from different parts of South America, from the Middle East, from Pakistan and Bangladesh and places like that. And one of the activities that I do that's very popular, and it's not one of them that I assess, but just playing the name game, right? Ask everybody to talk about their names, where they got it from, what the naming conventions in their culture are, who they're named after, why they're named after them. It gets people talking about their cultures in a way that even though there are two students, both of whom are Hispanic, have completely different ways of talking about their cultures, one from Puerto Rico and one from Guatemala. They're as different as you can imagine. Or somebody who is from Nigeria talking about his tribal, name and why that name is that way. So just engaging in these activities allows people to even in the academic environment, in their educational environment, be more open and learn to deal with one another. And I think to address the question that you actually asked, and that is, we do need to learn much more about one another and how to deal with each other and be open to hearing about each other. The polarization has never been as great as it is today. And so part of what is in the book is not just the rubric, but the activities and it feeds the urge that many of us have. And I assume that all of us who are in this conversation have that urge to break down those barriers. So one of the ways in which I feel really good about the book is it suggests small ways in which you can begin that process, regardless of whatever pushback they might be out there. You're here listening to us precisely because you're interested in doing just that. And there are many resources and, as I said, activities in the book that will allow you to use that in whatever setting you're in, because we don't talk to each other enough, I think, or we don't hear each other enough. We talk at each other a lot.
And I wanted to, sorry, Susan, did you want to jump in?
I was just going to say that I think there's, and I could be wrong, but a little more openness to intercultural exchanges and the importance of developing these kinds of skills in the higher education realm. Because clearly, I mean, we're seeing around the country how governments in some parts of the country are really trying to circumscribe what can be taught, you know, in the K through 12 areas. So, and I will say that even in State University of New York, which has really also been responding to questions or directives from the larger accrediting bodies, that the global awareness has to be addressed. And of course, people don't really know what global awareness is, and I'm not sure how you assess that, which is why also we are trying to really target specific skills. But that is a mandate, and so we're getting encouraged as opposed to getting any pushback.
So in the K-12 space, we talk a lot about the term global competence. And for some reason, I think that there needs to be a broader awareness raising of that term. I think people who are into global competence and know what the history is behind it and that sort of thing assume everybody knows, that education, K-12 education leaders know what that is. And I don't think that's the case. I think that it's a small group of interested people who are invested in the world that really know what it means. And I'd like to see a campaign around that in general. I also think the US has been a little cloistered from thinking about this because of our location. Whereas in Europe, it seems to me that there's, global citizenship is a given. There's funding that's available through Erasmus and that sort of thing for global education programs and that sort of thing. But here, from our perspective of running this conference on a shoestring budget for 10 years, there's like no funding out there for what we were trying to do unless somebody, all the funding has gone towards STEM education or, and so I think people have been really trying to be really creative about how we can meld the global competencies into other subject areas like career and technical education. And I think your book is an example too of how higher ed is thinking about this, and as it's not a separate course, it's not a separate program, it is embedded in what you do. I think that's fascinating. It should be in every course, some component. And I think the takeaway I had from your, talking about the skills is that it doesn't have to be everything. Pick one or two of those skills and focus on it in your course. Anyway, I just love this. I think this is great. Any other comments or questions from the audience before we wrap up? We've got a few minutes left. Anybody want to grab the mic and ask something? Everybody's so quiet.
I had a question, but I already asked the question.
Go for it,
so.
Greg. Come on, you can do it.
Okay. So, yeah, this actually relates to what you all were kind of just talking about. I think one of the things that's interesting is there's definitely, I have a strong belief that there is some transfer across kind of some of these competencies might be treated generally, or some of them might be specific, you might be open in some areas, but not open in another. And you have a wide range of experience in terms of maybe the global component, but also just empathy in general. And I just wonder, what are your thoughts about how general are these skills, and how I know one of the competencies was created, connecting it to your academic program. I can imagine it looks very different in different disciplines. And I might be more successful in some disciplines than others of connecting to people globally. So I just wonder, if you had any thoughts about what that kind of differential component of it, and how did you address that when you were creating the rubric?
Well, part of the answer is that, in fact, you really can't take all of those skills in one course or in one setting. You're going to have to pick and choose from them. But let me give you an example of one of the things that I do in my in a course that I teach, the senior seminar course, and it's called Cultural Neuroscience. And it looks at the sort of the effects of culture on the brain and the way in which the brain in different cultures also operates. So, and one of the activities which we carry through the semester, I divide students into groups, and one of the students, and every group is given a case with symptoms, presenting symptoms, and a brief profile. And every group, one of the members of the group volunteers to be the client and develops the backstory of that person, a middle-aged Muslim woman, and how she came to be in that environment, in the clinic, in hospital, wherever it was. They have to develop the backstory. The other three members of the group talk about, they're given a copy of a typical intake interview form, and they have to discuss the ways in which the person that they're going to be interviewing for the intake, how their culture, their religion, their age, their gender will affect both how they ask the questions, if they ask the questions, and how to respond to the answers when they get it. Then they role play, each group role plays that mock intake interview in front of the class. And the class, every member of the class has to write a reflection on that process. Obviously, the group members write their reflections on the development of the issues, the questions, what they would ask, why they would ask it that way, why they wouldn't ask certain questions, what they felt writing the backstory, that stuff. But the audience, the rest of the class, have guided questions like, what specific thing did you learn about this culture, whatever it is, that you didn't know before? And how does that relate to what you're going to take if you are a neuroscientist, if you are a doctor, if you are a nurse, or whatever the profession that they say that they're going to go into. Typically, they're going into a health-related profession if they're taking that class, but not all of them. Many of them, since they're psychology majors, are going into counseling, and that becomes critical. In therapeutic interventions of any kind. Those kinds of cross-cultural skills are really important. And what I found, and I give them the rubric at the very beginning, and they answer on the Likert scale where they are on those various dimensions. And at the end, I ask them to reflect. I give them back what they said about themselves, and they reflect on what they wrote about themselves at the beginning of the course and at the end of the course. And most of the responses that I get, they're not graded on this, is things like, I never would have thought, that I would have dismissed X about that person. I just assumed that all, Muslim women are just shy. I didn't realize that they wouldn't speak to me because I was male, or that there was a male relative sitting next to them and they wouldn't be able to talk about their symptom. Those reflections are really game-changing for many of the students. And it is about compassion and empathy, things that are not elements of the rubric themselves, but those are the shifts that I've seen take place as I've used those kinds of activities in the classroom. Does that address what you were asking?
Yeah, thank you.
And I'd just like to add something about, when you mentioned empathy. I think, we've sort of woven that particular concept into the rubric, but haven't clearly stated it as a separate skill category. And I can just give one example, again, in this virtual exchange coil. A Venezuelan professor in Venezuela with his students, some of whom sometimes are going without meals. They do not have easy internet access. They depend on their phones. but they have been working on this virtual exchange coil projects with students at university. It's also in SUNY, the University at Albany. And over time, what the Albany students have recognized is that how the attempt to really be able to communicate and to reach out and understand and share ideas and feelings, that so many barriers may have to be overcome in order to do that, and that helps them build empathy. And I know this particular Venezuelan professor has written a lot about that too. But so it's the kinds of just as Rooney said, it's the kinds of activities that you do that will really touch on, you know, that particular emotion.
And just one thing I'll add that takes you back to the book is, you know, we always start with learning outcomes. And so in the book, one of the things that we talk about is once you've selected your value, how do you think about creating a learning outcome that ties that value into the learning in your course? And then, like Rooney and Susan have talked to, then thinking about, well, what activities do I need and how am I going to assess it? And then making sure that everything is in alignment.
I'd like to jump in with a question. My name is Joanne Robinson. I am the Chief of Staff Executive Vice President at SUNY Old Westbury. And while I was at North Carolina State University, I worked in the area of diversity. And so that, you know, brings me to a point where we have a lot of diversity training going on at our institutions. I've also facilitated diversity training at other institutions. So my question is, there's a lot of work outside of the classroom around cultural competence. Has there been any work to help either facilitators of diversity training or working within student affairs and student activities who are focused on increasing cultural competence? Can you see this book being a tool that could be used in that environment, or has it been?
I can say absolutely. In fact, SUNY Coil Center has been working with different campuses with the equal opportunity programs. And actually, the person in charge of DEI right now in SUNY has facilitated some of this. And this experience started last year, and they said, I think there were, in some cases, working with Brazilian students, and the EOP students in SUNY said that they were amazed at how they could find commonalities and shared struggles, and the need for access, and that this is, you know, and this is one of the let's say the overreaching goals in SUNY right now, is to make sure that there is equal access across the diverse populations, and we're hoping to keep expanding that.
So I would like to add my 2 cents to what you said. In any institution like SUNY or any other organization, you can create as much diversity as you want. It's not that difficult. The main challenge is how to create equity and inclusion. And most of the lack of equity or inclusion comes from lack of understanding of the one or more of the skills that we mentioned. Like if you are not open, how can you create equity and inclusion? If you do not have the cultural worldview, how can you include other people in your conversations? So yes, the main points from this book can definitely be used for creating more meaningful, more effective DI initiatives.
Thank you for the question, Joanne. And I'm going to just jump in and say, we just published it. We hope that it will be used, but I don't want to sound too cynical when I say this, but people make all kinds of claims. They design programs for sensitivity and multicultural competency and inclusion and diversity, but whether or not they're effective is to this, in most cases anecdotal, which is why we created the book, so that we could look and track and see what changes were occurring, how they were occurring, if they were occurring. So I'm hoping that since there's, a lot of people engaged and they want to, have people more competent in diverse settings and to be more inclusive and all of that, and they're designing programs to do that, at least we can help them figure out, is it working? Is what they're doing effective? Are there ways to make it better? So, the book is brand new. I hope that people will use it for the purpose that it was written for, which is to be able to really be able to measure whether or not you are doing what you think you're doing. Are you creating more inclusivity? Are you making people in diverse environments able to communicate with each other? Are you, in fact, creating those skills of global awareness that you think you are doing? Because simply exposing people to information doesn't make them learn it or acquire the skill of it. So again, the book really is trying to give ways to think about how to engage students or people, whoever it is, at whatever level, in activities that will enable them to develop those skills and for you to track whether those skills in fact are being developed. So maybe we'll adopt it at Old Westbury.
We now have it in our library.
I want to thank you, Lucy, for inviting us today to speak about the book, and I'd like to thank everyone who joined us for the conversation. And if you want to be in touch with us, I know that Lucy has shared links in the chat, and we hope to hear back from you. We really do. We want to know how you've adopted it, because we know this is version 1, and we hope that we will be able to get enough feedback on where we want to go next. And there's a lot of ways where we can go next, and including DEI. For me, in the corporate setting, it's something that I think is a really great next step for us if we decide to go there. But thank you again all for inviting us to speak.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, and thank you for listening. And if there's anybody interested in using this book and giving us the data, we can begin the process of doing a formal academic validation of the tool itself. So please do be in touch if that's something of interest to you. And thank you again for your patience in listening to us.
It was great. I love getting to know you all and learning about how you work and how you teach. And so thank you everyone for coming. I want to make sure that we go over a couple of things before we close things out. So thank you for coming, first of all, and sharing your work with us. And hopefully, here's the link to the book in case people didn't get it. We are going to be doing more, and I would also encourage you all to think about doing a panel discussion at our upcoming conference in November. So Rebecca will have that information probably at some point. So I think we tend to have a lot of higher ed people involved in our community. It used to be with the Global Ed Conference, a lot of teacher ed people would send their students to listen to sessions and then reflect and blog about them and that sort of thing. So there is a significant population of higher ed people in our community. And so I think you would get even a bigger audience at that. So keep that in mind. This is going to be our last conversation for the summer because people are traveling and that sort of thing. We're going to resume them in August, probably mid to late August. And Dana Morenson from World Savvy is going to be talking about their work with school districts. Maria from World Savvy was here. So we're really excited to have Dana talk. She is an Ashoka Fellow. She is really dynamic and hilarious and just an all-around awesome human being. So we're excited to have her join us. Then Heather Singmaster from the Asia Society, who's another phenomenal global ed person. She's going to be, she was supposed to be scheduled in June, and she had a conflict and we have to reschedule her. So she'll probably be scheduled right up when we announce our new lineup for the fall. So if anybody is interested, I would love to have you drop into any of these as your schedules allow. Again, here's my information. Here's the link to our community and our social media, and you can follow us there. But that's all I have for now, and I'm going to hopefully stop recording if I can navigate there. And thank you again for coming. Here we go.